So she is going to present Lolita Chakrabarti's Remembering of the 19th Century English Stage in Red Velvet, 2012, and Neo-Victorian reading. Whenever you're ready, yes, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here. As a longtime member of the Literature, Arts and Performance group led by Professor Laura Monrose, it is always delightful and very rewarding to be involved in the many activities of national and international scope that our indefatigable director fosters. In the following minutes, I will present my current research for the project, which in its endeavor both to celebrate and to critically assess how women have staged and restaged the 19th century, looks into British playwright Lolita Chakrabarti's debut play, Red Velvet. I would like to argue that Red Velvet, a historical play and a memory play that brings visions and restages Ira Aldridge's fleeting debut as Othello at Covent Garden in 1833, shall be regarded as a major contribution to what Nadine Baum-Schnittke and Susanne Gross called the Neo-Victorian project, being a play that firstly, as the German scholars claim, looks into the desires and context that tinge and shape the perspectives of our contemporary construction of memory. Secondly, explores and as a performative act embodies and actually enacts the changing purposes with which we fashion the past and we read ourselves. And thirdly, in this process of self-fashioning, addresses 21st century identity and representation politics in the United Kingdom. Red Velvet opened over a decade ago in October 2012, directed by Indu Rubasingham at the Tricycle Theatre, and was Lolita Chakrabarti's, a trained British actress born in Birmingham in 1969, first authored play. It exposed on the stage the life of the American-born Black actor Ira Aldridge, known as the African Rushes, who was not the first African-American professional performer of Shakespeare, an honor that goes to James Hewitt in 1821, but was the first Black classic actor to achieve great distinction as an interpreter of Shakespeare and the first American to do so, both in Great Britain and the European continent. In the pioneering biography of the actor, Ira Aldridge, the Negro Tragedian, published in 1958, Herbert Marshall and Mildred Stark, claimed, using the terminology proper of the 1950s, that he was, and I quote, the first Negro to play White Rose, including the greatest in world drama, Macbeth, Shylock, King Lear, end of quote. As Chakrabarti has acknowledged, she trained in the late 80s as an actress at RADA, the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art in London, arguably one of the best drama schools in the world, and I quote, never once heard of the name of Ira Aldridge. She came across his name by chance a few years later, and driven by her curiosity to know more about him, embarked in a pre-internet 15-year research journey leading her to the writing of the play, including 3 years devoted to the research of Aldridge's life and 30 drafts of the play written over 7 years that were rejected from every theatre in London. Aldridge was born in 1807 in New York, the son of a straw seller and preacher. In spite of his humble origins, he attended the African Free School, where he received classical education, and as a teenager worked in the all-Black African Grove Theatre founded by William Alexander Brown. Instead of following his father's steps, Ira aspired to become a professional actor, but aware that the racial prejudice prevented the fulfillment of his ambition in the United States. In 1824, at the age of 17, he traveled to England with the hope of acting in non-segregated theatres. His transatlantic venture was indeed a successful one, for he had his London debut at the Royalty Theatre in East End in 1825. And as early as 1826, he was even portrayed by James Northcote in Manchester in his role as Othello in an oil on canvas now owned and exhibited at Manchester Art Gallery. Thus started a long career with performances given in an exceptionally wide range of conditions for over 40 years in London, across England, Scotland, Ireland, and much of Eastern Europe, until he died while on tour in Lodz in Poland in 1867 at the age of 60 and received there a state funeral. As an actor who was knighted by the Duke of Saxe-Meiningen, presented with a first-class gold medal from His Majesty Frederick William IV, given the Grand Cross of the Order of Leopold the Emperor Franz Joseph of Austria, among other endowments, and who at the height of his career sold out the ball show for nights over and was familiar with Hans Christian Andersen, the Tolstoys, Sir Edward Bulwer-Lytton, Charles Dickens, Franz Liszt, and many other celebrities. Chakrabarti found it truly astounding at the end of her research that such an excellent thespian could have been forgotten for over a century and a half, and his existence, in Tronika's words, practically erased from the archive of British theatre history. Scholarship on Aldrich is now profuse, and there is abundant archival material about him. But the simultaneous and unconnected launchings of Professor Ben Liffin's 4-volume series of exhaustive biographies published by Rochester University Press between 2011 and 2015, and the premiere of Chakrabarti's play were momentous and particularly significant for the recent canonization of the tragedian. Chakrabarti is not the first playwright to have summoned Aldrich's life on the stage. The first one was American actor, playwright, and director Ossie Davis, who wrote and produced Curtain Call Mr. Aldrich, set in 1963. British playwright David Poorner's Black Star was staged in England in 1987. Leonardo III penned a monodrama entitled Splendid Mama in 1988, and in 2021, Scott Newstart listed up to 19 plays inspired by Aldrich's career, but none of them seem to have achieved the success that Chakrabarti's play had in the United Kingdom in the past decade. Chakrabarti earned the Critics' Circle Award for Most Promising Playwright in 2013, the AWA for Arts and Culture in 2013, and Adrian Lester received the London Critics' Circle Award for Best Actor for his portrayal of Aldrich. The play transferred to St. Anne's Warehouse in New York City and London's West End, and has had to date over 40 productions. Red Velvet's success might be related to the play's intense meta-theatricality and invocations of a series of meta-historical and meta-fictional conjunctions relating to the Victorian stage era with the contemporary scene. Benjamin Poore and Beth Palmer argued that, and I quote, given the many ways that the Victorian era has colonized the popular imagination in terms of our expectations of what theatre is, red curtain, the limelight, the solid three-dimensional set, the dark and hushed atmosphere, the ornate gilded auditorium, this influence is particularly hard and even futile to repress in Neo-Victorian performance. In Red Velvet, in fact, not only is not repressed, but visually reproduced in all its magnificence. The playwright has explained that she chose the title based on the thrill of her first visit to the theatre in London, West End, as a 50-year-old schoolgirl from Birmingham, who was completely seduced by the faded glamour of the Victorian theatres, the ghosts within, and the evocative texture of the red velvet seats and curtains. An experience that also the contemporary British playwrights such as Winsome Pinnock have recalled. The play, however, also exposes the many efforts, sacrifices, and challenges that remain unseen behind the scenes before professional actors get the break in acting, if they manage to get it at all. The action of the play opens in an opulent dressing room, all gilt and velvet in Lodz in Poland in 1867, showing audiences a young Polish journalist, Halina Wozniak, in her quest to interview the eminent aging actor described as grand, impatient, ferocious, and unwell, and who is indeed unwilling to engage in conversation. And yet, confronted with the quick question of why he has not played Covent Garden for more than 30 years, the next scene moves the action to April 1833, initiating thus a long flashback that restages in 5 scenes Aldrich's 2-night London debut at one of the only 2 legitimate theatres licensed at the time to perform straight drama before the Theatres Regulation Act. So Red Velvet's initial scene sets the retrospective frame of a memory play, a formal technique that underscores the revisionary engagement of a theatrical text that can be labeled as Neo-Victorian precisely because it's no mere historical fiction set in the 19th century, but rather self-consciously engaged with the act of reinterpretation, rediscovery, and revision concerning the Victorians. The yet Scots scholarship criticism on the play has focused predominantly on the connections between its revisionist approach and the negotiation of racial meaning, both in the Victorian era and the contemporary moment. Building on the existing literature and endorsing it, I want to contend and further stress how the play's success in this endeavor relies greatly on Chakrabarti's formal structuring of the play, not only on its retrospective narrative frame, but also on her choice of a definite single episode of Aldridge's cosmopolitan career that, when restaged and reproduced in great detail, as if expanded and seen through a magnifying lens, is remembered. I use this term as African-American playwright Susan Laurie Parks defines it in her 1995 influential essay, Possession. That is, as a technique that, when aligned with the staging of historical events, through their appearing on stage, make them, a quote, ripe for inclusion in the canon of history, and turn theatre into an incubator for the creation of historical events. Why this necessity to remember as an action related also following the etymology of the term member to recomposing parts or limbs or reinstating the relevance of a member, that is, a person belonging to a group? On the one hand, that a twist of fate made Aldridge perform at Covent Garden to replace Edmund Kean, who had collapsed on the stage a few weeks before while playing Othello, is well known in the history of Shakespearean performance. Renaissance scholars such as Professor Joyce MacDonald had already claimed 30 years ago that Aldridge's version of Othello marked a critical moment in the history of the play's staging of race and racial difference. In fact, in spite of Edmund Kean's revision of a previous tradition of blackface with his tawny Othello, the role still emphasized the status of blackness, quote, as an imaginative product of white cultures. And as a black man performing the role of a black man, Aldridge forged a new link between signs and meanings. Interestingly enough, Aldridge's name was, on the other hand, however, concurrently erased, for instance, in the two-volume The Annals of Covent Garden Theatre from 1732 to 1897 by Henry Sachs Wyndham, published in 1906 at the end of the Victorian period. After the two evenings in which Aldridge had his debut, the theatre went dark for the first time in its history, and the French Pierre Laporte soon dropped the reins of his short and unfortunate management. Admittedly, thus, such brief a run could be certainly overlooked. But what Chakrabarti does then is, in Marlene Tronicke's words, to mark an intervention in processes of remembering and forgetting by repositioning Ira Aldridge in the annals of Victorian drama. As suggested before, the playwright's choice of the two single evenings when a black actor played Othello before a shocked audience becomes a perfect means to interweave a private failure with a collective historical failure exposing British historical racism. As it happens, Aldridge's debut took place precisely when the British Parliament was engaged in the debates that culminated in the passage on 31st of July 1833 of a bill emancipating British-owned slaves in the West Indies. Chakrabarti uses firstly sound cues to connect Ira's life with this key historical event in the transition from the 1867 present of the first scene to the fictional Aldridge's memoried past of 1833 of the second one. Thus, when the Lord's spade, sounds of hundreds of voices of protesters chanting, shouting are heard, together with the distant "Rule Britannia, rule the waves." As the action of the play then moves through the stage of Covent Garden in scene 2, the character of actor Henry Forrester identifies the particular moment Red Velvet remembers as a crossroads, a point of absolute unequivocal change. Small talk between the characters of Forrester and the older and more conservative actor Bernard Ward serve to further contextualize the political debate about the slave trade and its impact on the British economy and evoke an offstage reality of confusion and distress. How do you think this theatre was built? Argues Ward. As the action unfolds within the safe, comfortable, and luxurious theatrical space, enclosed by the softness of red velvet curtains, the members of the acting company start gathering to resume performances after Edmund Kean's indisposition. Once Pierre Laporte announces that Charles, his son, Charles will not replace his father, and announces to the company that Ira Aldridge will step in that night, his eventual entrance is followed by an open-mouthed silence, which counterpoise but is also intimately connected with the previous public offstage clamor. The dramatic force of Chakrabarti's script relies firstly on its meticulous speculative restaging of the embodied visceral reactions of the different actors and actresses towards Aldridge's blackness and charismatic presence. An outraged Charles Kean is the only character openly uttering his opposition to Laporte's decision. As he argues in a momentary absence of Ira on the stage, if we bring Jews to play Shylock, blacks to play the Moor, half-wits to play Caliban, we decimate ourselves in the name of what? Fashion? Politics? Then any drunken fool on the street will play Falstaff. On the contrary, his fiancée Ellen Tree, who plays Desdemona, and Harry Forrester are the characters more openly embracing a casting decision that in fact most suitably reflected the interracial marriage devised by William Shakespeare in Othello. Secondly, Red Velvet's dramatic force relies also to a great extent on the construction of Aldridge as a character unconstrained by heritage, who likes, I quote, chance, possibility, to listen and respond. At once exotic and ahead of his time in his innovative advocacy of direct physical and emotional contact, and an anachronistic domestic style of acting instead of the teapot style in vogue, and thus defying with his very presence London's theatrical snobbery, even if only for an ephemeral two-night run. Chakrabarti makes us see on the stage Ira as Othello in scene 4 of Act 3 of Shakespeare's play, in the key scene where the story of the handkerchief and its magic web is told, with actor and actress holding hands and looking at each other, as well as a careful rehearsal of Othello's mothering of Desdemona that could not have been seen before in Covent Garden. But then, after the apparent success of the first night in scene 5, the members of the company read the reviews of the opening night, which are reproduced verbatim from the Athenaeum, the Spectator, and the Times, and in being uttered, they unmistakably show an open racial prejudice. After this confrontation with the audience's reactions in Shakespearean fashion, a falling action slowly unfolds. The play concludes as it opened in lots after the London flashback with the shocking image of an aging Aldridge applying white face to his dark skin to play Lear. By reimagining Aldridge's success and fall from grace, Red Velvet's contribution to the cultural work of the theatre in the 21st century is to foster an act of reinvigorated historical consciousness that, in overtly reclaiming the role of the theatre in the words of the fictional Pierre as a political act, a debate of our times, amends Aldridge's forgotten relevance, remembers his celebrity, and overtly links his personal failure at Covent Garden to the collective failure of a society culturally unprepared to accept the actor's difference. In a 2016 essay, Sophie Duncan convincingly argued that Chakrabarti's contemporary alignment of Ira's blackness with the modern and progressive is achieved through his intersectional alliances in the script. In fact, Ira is the only character to share significant dialogue with African-Caribbean maid Connie, and he also sympathizes with the young Polish reporter Halina, anti-imperialist subordination. This modernization was likewise enabled by the crucial omission and elision of both Aldridge's Jim Crow career and the planned presence of Mungo in Bickerstaff's The Paddler alongside Othello, which reflect our contemporary cultural diffidence when restaging the disconcerting 19th century racial other. In her view, these gaps, together with the omission of extant more praise in theatrical reviews, were crucial for a rapturous reception of the play in London and allowed 21st century audiences to comfortably identify with an admirable, modernized and modernizing Aldridge. But it is yet to be seen if the forthcoming film biopic of Aldrich, penned by Chakrabarti and directed by Kenneth Branagh, shall bring a more historical, accurate, or less progressive view of the actor. I think to conclude that it's nonetheless vital not to underestimate the relevance and cultural impact of Red Velvet's alignments of the views. Beyond being Chakrabarti's playwriting debut, it was also Ruth Bassingham's strong start to her tenure as Tricycle's new artistic director, which turned her into the first British woman of colour to run a major London theatre. The play certainly reflects the agenda of a local venue that Nicholas Kent had turned already into a major political powerhouse, and that aims at reflecting the very diversity of Kilburn. But I found it telling that it was only within the space of liberty provided by the fringe and the margins of London's theatrical scene that these two women could envision the Pride and Prejudice of its centre. More importantly, however, they could intervene in British theatrical history with their inclusive refashioning of both the 19th and the 21st century stages. In her published working diary of 2018, Lolita wrote, "I know the profession is changing at last, but to be part of that change is empowering. For the past 28 years, I have often been the only person of color in so many rooms, and the fact that rarely happens now is a relief." Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for those very, very inspiring papers. And now we open the floor for the audience, because we are in a theater. Okay, do you have any questions? Any remarks? Yeah, there's one there.
Thank you. Hi, okay. Thank you for both your papers. I have a question for Anna. Thank you for such a multifaceted view of Red Velvet. I have a question about the way that acting styles are depicted in the play. And you kind of touched on it a bit. I wonder if you could elaborate a little more. I wondered, reading the play, if we were being presented with a view of Aldrich before his time as a kind of proto-naturalist, so somebody who anticipated the turn of the 20th century, and whether that was kind of bound up in the play's appeal to 21st century audiences. It's like trying to present him as a sympathetic actor in an acting language that audiences in 2012 would understand, and whether that was performing any kind of sleight of hand with history of what we know of Aldrich's actual acting style.
Well, thank you for your comment. I have to say I haven't seen the play. I didn't have a chance, and the available video recordings are actually not available because the archive is being transferred now, the Victorian Albert collection. So, but the reviews definitely enhance how Leicester played very well with that somehow anachronistic portrayal of the actor as presenting a new style of acting, more modern style of acting. So the script definitely works on that, and I think it's a deliberate strategy, because it is in the end a contemporary play, and there has been criticism because obviously the playwright selects several scenes or a particular approach for her agenda, but there are things that are omitted, so we don't know much. But there are plenty of reviews, and he seems to have been of the time, and he seems to have been very charismatic nonetheless, and very different to perhaps also some American to the British actors or main British actors of the 19th century. Thank you.
Thank you both. I really appreciated both of them. My question is for Kelly Jean Lynch. I was particularly interested about statue prisons, which is actually, I immediately thought of Isadora Duncan when we were describing, but I know tableaus from theater, but statue prison is sort of new to me. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about connections that you see between statue prisons, tableaus in theater, or the implications of Stebbins' statue prisons on modern dance. It just suddenly really sparked my interest and I don't know anything.
Well, there's not a lot of scholarship on statue posing in Israel. There's just little bits and pieces here, so I've kind of just amalgamated the information. But essentially, it was just like in salon, home salon performances, or of elite family homes, or else, like you'd be like a biblical heroine, say the Queen of Esther, and they kind of like, maybe there's a famous painting of the Queen of Esther, and they'd kind of like get into a pose as the Queen, and then everybody, then your educated audience had to guess, who are you? And it was just like a kind of fun entertainment at the time, or a famous statue that just like wings of something, victory or something like that, and everybody like, oh, I know, everybody knew what it was. So you had to kind of be able to identify with these iconic characters. But Stebbins in particular did goddesses, so statues of goddesses, and some of her books had the images of different goddesses. And she was known for kind of innovating, moving from one to another. So she'd be in a particular pose, and then she was known to like do like some sort of flow transformation to be like an Amazon warrior or something. And she created all these drills. Like drills was a term then for choreographed movement sequences. So she did things like the Amazon drill. And there's a number of different, like 5 sets of choreographed movement sequences where it's written out, and you can kind of try to, she'd be like, and the horn is back at the ear, like as if you were holding a spear, and then you're bending down, and it's like you're throwing a big rock. Or it's just kind of odd, but it inspired from goddesses, and the Amazon was kind of like, the Wonder Woman of today. So they were kind of trying to embody these very powerful women that they knew of through classical education and the actual stories and the myths of these goddesses. So this was their way of like becoming a goddess through movement. And Isadora Duncan was very familiar with her movement, but Ruth St. Denis in particular saw Stebbins perform at the Madison Square Theater when she was a 14-year-old. Her mother took her to theater to see a matinee, and she was so impressed. She wrote about it in her autobiography, saying it inspired her to have a vision of dance, the dance yet unknown. Like she wanted to like move on with what she had seen, and she ended up like almost a decade later presenting the goddess Isis, which was the first performance that she saw Stebbins perform as a goddess, mythological goddess Isis.
Thank you both. That was their great presentations. I have a question for Kelly. There's 2 actually. The first was in relation to the statues and that kind of work. Coincidentally, in that period, there was the Tanago discoveries. So I'm just thinking aloud that might have something to do with the importance of statue work. I think I see that working into Sarah Bernhardt's work with Nadar, and there's a similar aesthetic, but that's just a thought. Do you know anything about use of music? Because I was thinking in terms of obviously Delsarte and coming in of possibly also ballet traditions in terms of first, second, the posing. Do you know, first, if you could tell me something, if there's the use of music. And the second question is around Delsarte again in terms of the time that this emerged, so it's late 19th century America, and in terms of just immigrant populations and changing cities, in terms of the visibility and the elocution of the everybody. So one's about music and the other's about just the leadership, because you're talking about women in the audiences, and I was interested in how they read this. Thanks.
Well, for Stebbins in her performances, she used music. And for some of her drills, her movement drills that are written in some of her texts, there are actually music selections at the back of it. I'd love to have the music recreated, and then to have dance students or theater students learn how to do it in relation with the music would be pretty fascinating. But at that time, they didn't, aside from the ballet, using music and dance, like even Ruth St. Denis and Isadora Duncan had challenges with that. They didn't want to see interpretations of music. was a bit of a challenge, but they did anyway. But on another note, well, Delsarte had died in 1870, so the phenomenon of Delsartism kind of just merged and evolved into general like pantomimic movement and expression overall. For and I get back to your question also, was this the group tableau or tableau vivant was a very famous things that people would use in theater productions, and basically, it's a still moment of heightened dramatic action, say in a play where like there'd be like 20 people, and then all of a sudden, like there's the flags are raised, and everybody's like tragedy, like laying on the ground. You see the death of all the soldiers and the people and the mourners, and it creates a flash imagery, like it's like a climactic moment. And ballet productions, of course, always still use that. Would be very fascinating to actually see the dance company that we're going to see tomorrow night, because I believe they're using group posing or tableau vivant. Should be quite fascinating to see. I don't think I got to every question.
Just for the audience here, that she struggles a lot to have Lolita Chakrabarti this week, but she couldn't make it because she's having a premiere for show today. Tomorrow is the London premiere of her adaptation of Hamlet. For the Royal Shakespeare Company. Tomorrow is the press night at the Garrick Theatre in London. So she couldn't possibly make it, but next time we will bring her, and so our plan was to interview her, but yes, next time first. She will do that. So probably. So that is just coming for the audience to me. And then we also have a question and a comment. Second paper, given that was fascinating. I did not know about this lady. I think that her career and her work, not just with amazing women that we have studied and have been influenced by theatre history and dance history. I've been recently working in television at some point, just to add to the comments. I think that statue posing in television at some point that just mix up. So you find out to be on stage, but outside the performances like autumns and the colours, we use the terms television and statue posing, so we can see the threats and the transitions as well. And this is something that I really let the choreographer tomorrow speak to you about. But this was this came up in discussions on how to meet and live with community themselves nowadays. And just decided just to break up conventions. So that only reduces of what's available well. We've got moves now, I'm not really but I feel like you enjoy it. My question was related with the statue posting is the women's clubs, because you mentioned that at some point that she was, I don't know if I understood this well, she was training women at women's clubs, poetry, or sing, or
she would speak and lecture at women's clubs, like for example the Professional Women's League, which was actually the organization for all the actresses in New York City, and they would do these fundraising events, and they had a massive club that like could house 500 women, and they would do their own performances for each other, or give lectures for each other in their own club, and they do fundraisers for actresses in need. And she gave lecture demonstrations, so she'd speak about the system of Delsarte and then demonstrate statue posing and the different like emotional stances, like different women they called. She did one on the Viraggio, which is like a strong, independent woman. She kind of moved from pose to pose, which people talk about today. There's what the art of posing and how you can have a sensorial, reacting to it. Like if you're going to get a powerful pose, it's Andrew Cuddy or something. Amy Cuddy. Anyway, there's a person that has done contemporary research on the art of posing, but for those women, it was like an act of embodiment and empowerment.
Thank you very much, because I've been reading about the choice of teaching and courses in poetry and women's clubs in 1990, but I have not come across with also a teaching of posing, which could be influencing the discourses and the speeches. For the questions. And thank you very much for that reference.
Actually, I'm working with a colleague, also Carrie Streeter. I work in a research group, a psychophysical research group, and one of the scholars in the group has written about Black American Delsartians. It's because we have like digital access now to newspapers. You can look, just put in Delsart and then so much stuff comes up that you would not be able to, have found like 15, 20 years ago. So it's quite fascinating. And these women used the art of expression, trying to speak for one another. And so they had these performances, American Black Delsart performances. They would raise money for their churches and their community, and they'd give these events, and people would pay them money, and they'd have fundraisers for the communities, and they would come out and speak about suffragette women's the vote and all, employment and any women's issues. These women's clubs, of course, would have many speakers, and they were trained to be vibrant public speakers so they could get their message across to other women and kind of rally people to their cause. But you had to have some training to do that successfully.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions? Because it's about time. Okay, yeah. No, go ahead.
I wrote myself a note when we were speaking, and I wrote Aldrich's Othello as a product of white culture, and I found that very eye-opening, and I'm wondering if you can elaborate a little bit more on that, whether there's a historical understanding of that, or if that is really from the play, the contemporary play Red Velvet. It struck me, so I wrote it down. Because then it goes back, it actually ties in my mind to this idea of posing and representation, and then posing as the male culture, the male view of the woman. And I thought it was really interesting, and it was about Aldrich as a product, performing Othello as a product of white culture.
That was a quotation from a 1994 article by Joyce MacDonald, entitled Acting Black, Othello Burlesques and the Performance of Blackness. And what she actually identifies is the status of Blackness in Othello, perhaps in other plays, as an imaginative product of white cultures. So it's actually her view, but is actually there is a lot of Shakespearean criticism, contemporary Shakespearean criticism, reworking that tradition. And in fact, you might view Othello as the only and main Black character in the Anglophone, even Western tradition for centuries. The problem with I've read a lot, but the problem with doing research about this play is that there are so many elements. There's the play within the play, there's the research on Othello, the Victorian theatre, the contemporary stage. In the end, it's very difficult, but there's so much literature on that. And I think that was, I think I agree with you that it is, that statement is a wide opening concerning this particular play. And yeah. Thank you. I hope I answered your question.